John, what do we know of this Israeli airstrike in Rafah?
Well, Gemma, this is probably one of the worst attacks of the whole war. It's in the Tel Al Sultan neighbourhood in the west of Rafah. Now, the Israelis had warned a few weeks ago for people to leave the east, that was going to be the combat zone. A lot of people had fled to the west for safety. This was designated a safe zone by the Israelis, and now the images, the pictures coming out of there are horrific in terms of burnt people, children burnt alive, decapitated children. The images are so bad that a lot of the NGOs won't post anything. And so this is, I think, possibly the worst attack of the whole war.
What has Israel said about it?
Israel, as always, says, we're targeting Hamas sites. And, clearly Hamas is still operating somewhere around Rafah. They fired those missiles into Israel a few hours before this. It's interesting, though, the reaction, for example, in the UK, Baroness Sayeeda Warsi, who's a Conservative. She was the former head of the Conservative Party. And she's tweeted a short time ago, "Too awful to repost charred and decapitated bodies of children, and all while the world watches." She says, "I truly hope that in my lifetime we see those in power held to account." Now, she's not talking about the Israelis here. She's now saying her own government. She says those who have failed to stop this, the appalling, heartless leaders who could not even find the words to condemn a massacre. And she's saying this is on their watch because they armed, she's talking about the UK, supported and failed to condemn Netanyahu and his extreme right-wing government. They have continued to arm and support a regime that has brutally slaughtered innocents for months. Now, the world, including Anthony Albanese, warned about Rafah. Antony Blinken warned about it. The Israelis have ignored those warnings, and now we have clearly women and children have been burnt alive by the bombing in Rafah. This is an absolutely appalling incident.
John, this came after rockets were fired by Hamas towards Israel, the first long-range attack by Hamas since January. Israel did manage to repel them for the most part.
That's right. According to the Israeli army, 7 or 8 missiles were fired from Rafah. I think all but one was intercepted, and one hit a house, and fortunately no one was killed or injured. So the Iron Dome system worked there. This came a few hours later, and so whether it was in retaliation for that or whatever, but it's really interesting that the Israelis have targeted the part that was designated as a safe zone. There's a pattern here now. A lot of the Palestinians were told to head south by the Israeli army, and one convoy of Palestinians fleeing was bombed, and many people died then. Then you had the aid incident, the Australian aid worker, where on 3 separate strikes, the Israeli Air Force, it wasn't just like an accident, they actually targeted the convoy at 3 separate occasions. And now this will add fuel to people around the world, the ICC and others, who are saying that Israel is blatantly committing war crimes while the world watches.
What about the timing of that initial Hamas attack with the rockets, as we say, the first long range since January? What do you make of the timing of that?
Well, I think Hamas is trying to show it still has capability. Only 2 or 3 weeks ago, they fired at the Kerem Shalom crossing, the major crossing. They killed 3 Israeli soldiers there for their own military purposes, not taking into account Palestinian civilians, because obviously Hamas is complicit in a lot of the deaths going on there as well, because it's a war. But I think Hamas is trying to show the Israelis that if we are about to embark on ceasefire talks, which are still in the wings, we still have military capability. Tragically, though, look at what the result is now. Yet again, women, children being burnt alive and killed.
John, over the weekend, judges at the ICJ ordered Israel to halt the offensive in Rafah and withdraw from there. Does this all stem from that case brought on by South Africa?
That's right. That initial South African case, quite different, of course, from the ICC, which is looking at arrest warrants for Hamas leaders and the 2 Israeli leaders. This is that court had said that we will tell you if we think that you are going into territory that gets in the in the zone of war crimes or genocide. So this is stemming from that case a few weeks ago, the South Africa case.
And John, yeah, you made that distinction there. So separate to the International Criminal Court, judges there are considering these arrest warrants for Israel's Prime Minister, the Defence Minister and also 3 leaders of Hamas.
That's right. The now 3 judges of the ICC will have to examine what they say is the evidence. There's 7 pages of evidence there against both Hamas, the grounds of what they did on October 7, the atrocities and the slaughter they committed, and then the subsequent war. The main accusation against Israel is that they are using starvation as a weapon of war, and the argument against Israel will be people like the World Food Programme saying it's a full-blown famine now in the north of Gaza, as well as the Defence Minister, Yoav Gallant from Israel, saying we will cut off Gaza, we will cut off food and water. The ICC is going to use their own words to say, you actually said you were going to do it, you know it's a war crime, therefore you've got to answer for that.